Uh, I like that discussion. Uh, it's always good to well, when you first said that, as the scientist in me, being a biologist for pretty much all my life now, and teaching at the university, when you said outlandish, I'm thinking, well, the motivation is, I guess, clicks for a site or attention. But Dennis, and I want to measure the weekly excitation level versus the clicks. Has anybody done that? I mean, if I'm going to be outlandish, what's the tier of outlandish I'm going to be? Does that bring me more clicks? I would want to map that out and get the stats for a few years so I would know exactly how outlandish to be. And I bet you there's a timing issue. Is it in the morning or afternoon? I know there are marketing people that know that stuff. So I'm just telling you guys that are outlandish, don't be just outlandish at the wrong time or the wrong level of outlandishness. You need science of fantasy football. And Dennis and I, for a small fee, will help you with your outlandish metrics. And we'll put you on a weekly program and we'll get you where you need to be on your clicks. I'm just, Dennis, I got to advertise. I just realized we have another avenue to make a little extra horse racing money. Uh, you know, trimming the bankrolls of some of our outlandish competitors out there a little bit. But imagine if I was being outlandish, wouldn't you want to know? Okay, I need to go DEFCON 3 on outlandishness. My clicks would be getting awful low this week. There's too much real life getting in my way with all the craziness in the world we've been experiencing the last few weeks. How outlandish do you have to be to cut through all that fog to get you some attention? So let me help you folks. So professors is available for hire, and we can get those metrics rolling for you.
And one of the most one of the most vivid examples
Hmm.
of of experience paying off
Yeah.
happened for me at the Scott Fish Bowl.
Ooh.
So a live draft in Chicago last Sunday,
Yeah.
a lot of fun, but it's a very noisy environment. When I draft professor
Yeah.
and I get to my point in my pick, I'm very methodical on how I go about getting that next player and what that next player means to my roster.
Hmm.
It's tough to do when you got 150 people being really noisy in a room, most of them quite inebriated by the middle of the draft. So the my experience paid off of being very methodical and having an idea of what I wanted to do, but also understanding that if you take a big swing in an event like the Scott Fish Bowl, it could pay off and it could hurt you. Like you're going to either finish, maybe you're going to finish first, maybe you're going to finish last. If that's what you're going for, that's fine. And that comes into how you strategize with your picks because I saw some people, professor, taking one returner very early in the draft, much
So
earlier.
so interrupt. So return yards are significant this year. Is that
Oh yeah.
okay?
Yeah. So
So.
for every 5 yards in
Mhm.
return, in kick return
Mhm.
yards, whether it's a kick or a punt return, you get a point.
Ah, nice.
And for every touchdown scored, now touchdowns are very rare
Oh yeah.
in kick and punt returns, but you get 10 points for one of those.
Mhm.
The rules have changed dramatically. This is the biggest change we'll ever have, maybe,
Mhm.
in kick returns in the NFL this season, where the
Mhm.
two teams are going to line up. The kick coverage and the kickoff team, the team receiving, the team kicking, are going to be 5 yards away from each other, Professor.
Mhm.
So you're not going to have these same big strategies that you've had in the past. And lately, the strategy has been just kick the ball out of the end zone and the ball
Yeah.
comes out to the 25. So now the ball comes out to the 30. You're going to more likely have more returns this year because I think some teams are going to figure out they're going to have a very talented kicker. If the weather conditions are favorable to try to do like a high hanging kick, these kickers are amazing in what they can do with the ball. You might have some bouncy kicks because you don't need to get your kick coverage team. You don't need the hang time to get your kick returners down the field because they're 5 yards away now. So, will we see some guys that learn how to kind of squib it over that group and get a bouncing, rolling ball going towards the returners? One thing's for sure, Professor, 32 teams
Yeah.
will probably see like 20 or 25 different strategies. On both the return team side, will they utilize a high end guy? Will they utilize maybe their second or third best wide receiver or their second or third best running back to return kicks more often than just putting a rookie out there? Or will teams be more concerned about injuries because there'll be more actual kick returns? Everybody is going to have a different strategy. And I still think a lot of teams are going to,
I'm curious about the dome teams. I think we need to
ooh,
chart those metrics.
yes,
I'm curious, couple years we'll see, the level of return in domes and wind, some of your metrics you like to study on the weather. I think
yes,
it will pay off if we figure that out a little bit. Just, I'm talking over under, props, things that you and I may be easing into a little bit this year. That may be something I think Vegas is going to be paying attention as well on this besides Scott Fishbowl.
yeah, it definitely will. And so I saw a strategy used in Scott Fishbowl that I thought was absolutely magnificent.
Uh-oh.
So after getting his quarterbacks and his tight ends, the guy then drafted 15 different kick returners.
Oh my God.
And the strategy concept here, Professor, is
Yeah.
I only have to hit on
Two, three.
half of those
Yeah. Or half. Okay.
to be to be valuable. And now I can turn my roster over for the other ones.
Hmm.
My strategy was a little different.
Hmm.
My strategy was to not worry about returns
Hmm.
as much. So early rounds, first 10 to 12 rounds, I didn't care. If somebody wanted to take a mad dash and try to get Rashid Shaheed or, another one of the returners from last year that was really good, figuring that he'll score even more points this year,
Hmm.
go for it. I'm going to line up my team with guys that I know what their roles are going to be because we've never seen a change like this. So I don't know what the coaches are going to do. Now, first weekend of the season, I'm going to be charting every single depth chart piece on that kick return.
Right.
I'm going to know what teams are doing. I'm going to sift through the statistics and see if I can pick up on anything. Is there a player on waivers that I should add to my team? And I'm not going to be shy of bidding for that player with a lot of money. Because if we see some trend in week one
What's the
on
fab
somebody who's a,
in
yeah,
Scott Fishbowl? Is there a fab
there
with?
is fab. There's $100
Okay.
to spend during the season. But as we learned last year, Professor,
Oh yeah.
if you spend that up front, you spent less per point.
Yeah.
And week 1, there are many more players available that you might want on your team than week 10.
Yes.
So
We will
spend
touch that, folks, in the
oh,
season.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about that strategy, but, with experience often comes wisdom.
Yeah.
I've looked at all of the variables, and I've said that in July when I'm drafting Scott Fishbowl, I'm honest enough to say that I don't know what I don't know, but there's one kick returner that I grabbed at value that I was amazed was still available as
Uh-oh.
late as I got him.
Yeah.
Trey Tucker from Las Vegas.
Trey Tucker. Okay.
He was their number 1 return man last season.
Mhm.
He's a backup wide receiver. I got him in the 17th round, Professor.
Nice.
17th round. Now, a guy that I was thinking about dabbling a little earlier, but he went faster than I was ready was Marvin Mims from Denver.
Right.
I think he's going to be a valuable player in the Scott Fish Bowl, but I wasn't so sure that if he can secure one of the top 2 wide receiver spots, whether they were going to use him as a kick returner. Because
Right.
how often have we seen coaches change kick returners
A lot.
almost every year?
A lot. Sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they get a guy who's fast, who's got a history from college that he's pretty good returning kicks, but he's also sort of their depth piece at wide receiver.
Gotcha.
He might be their
Or a
5th wide
gadget
receiver
player
on their
even,
roster.
like, what
Gadget
you
player.
remember old
Yeah.
Devin Hester?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How about Cordarrelle Patterson
Yeah, there's you
returning
another one
kicks?
that's a get has a spot, red zone, other kinds of situations.
So those are the kinds of players that I'm looking for late in drafts
Mhm.
because they may not have returned kicks last year,
Mhm.
but maybe you do see a Justin Fields returning kicks for Pittsburgh part-time.
Wouldn't
Maybe
that
you
be
see
something?
Taysom Hill returning some kicks for New Orleans. The key is this, Professor.
Yeah,
My experience lets me know that whenever there is a massive rule change in the NFL,
yeah,
that there won't be just one way to react to it.
yeah.
And because of that level of uncertainty, I didn't factor kick return yardage into my play in Scott Fishbowl. If it comes back to bite me, it comes back to bite me. But I built myself what I think is a very solid, balanced team. You know me and my better than zero RB. I usually have a lot more running backs on my roster than any other position. You only start one running back this year in Scott Fishbowl. Now, the rules, the scoring rules, give a slight advantage to running backs over wide receivers, especially as you go down the tiers. But I don't even think that's enough to offset the difference in injuries and everything else that could happen. So I didn't factor a lot of the rules into I didn't make big decisions in Scott Fishbowl just based on the rule differences this year. I looked at his past and the rules usually even out the point distribution among positions. So I'm figuring he's pretty good at what he does. I'm just going to build a team that is good and balanced since I only have to start one at each position and a lot of flex positions. And I came away with what I think is a pretty good team and laid it all out for everybody. My round by round strategy decisions in an article here at Science of Fantasy Football.
And that's up, folks, for y'all to check out. So come on by. Lots of other stuff to check out as well. Scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Woo woo.
And one of the things that I did do, Professor, is that I took that concept of back class
Yeah.
that we are talking about a lot, and I built back class into my strategy because I want guys that have a history of doing something in the past, because sometimes that will give you an idea of what they can do for the future. Was able to get Mike Williams really on the cheap, quite frankly. And guys like Devonta Smith, Chris Godwin, who we know what they are. But how about Pat Freiermuth? He's my number 2 tight end. If he plays back to his rookie season with a few more touchdowns, all of a sudden he is a pretty valuable guy. So I went for a lot of upside picks. And how about this, Professor? I rolled the dice. I took Nick Chubb in the 12th round.
Yeah, I read that in your article. We were watching him bench press or something, doing some exercise, and
Yeah.
he looked like he was doing quite well.
And of course, got some insurance later on.
Hmm.
Grabbed Deontay Foreman in the 16th round. So
Yep.
the strategy ideas, again, for Scott Fishbowl, have some players that have the back class to have done something. Have a couple of guys that return kicks. Damian Pierce, backup running back for Houston, also did some kick return duty last year. So I've got a good balanced attack. My quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott. You get only 1 point for every 50 yards passing. The running quarterbacks were going faster because of that. Instead, I pivoted to take the guys who are most likely to have more passing touchdowns since they're worth 6 points.
And
So,
just, yeah, and just something that it hits me that defenses, if you have a good defense, will you cause your opponent to have to kick more so your returner would have more opportunities? And in Scott Fishbowl, that could, give you a little edge. So I'm wondering, of course, I don't know if they'll keep the scoring next year, but that would be another thing. It just hits me to chart, Dennis, and given our defense against position metrics that I've already got, you and I have shared, and I will get to that soon, but not yet. I'm just wondering if that has a play. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You could envision you've got a great defense, make your opponents kick a lot, and that could be a benefit then for your kick returner.
and if your offense is really, really good that you're
Yeah.
going up against, they're going to score more. So I think there will be some situational awareness this year in Scott Fishbowl where I might use my last 2 draft picks, my 21st, 22nd draft picks, as guys that I'm playing the matchup. If I'm going up against a team with a great
Mhm,
offense and
mhm,
their kick returner is available, if I've got a kick returner
mhm.
for a team that is going to have a lot of points scored against them, that's more kickoffs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take that
I'm
opportunity, and
wondering if Rashid's down in New Orleans, who's his backup? Would that be a
well,
22nd pick? I mean,
I
everybody
think
went for him.
yes, and I think Bob Means, who is a rookie,
Uh-huh.
is likely to get a shot at that. He's also a wide receiver, so it
So
gives
that
him that
could
wide
be
receiver depth.
then a 22nd, you know, free square.
Exactly, and with the rule change, Professor,
Yeah.
you're not going to have maybe as many of these high hanging kickoffs unless they're trying to pin a guy in the corner.
Mhm.
So I have a feeling you're going to have more of a spread to where the
The ball might,
returners
yeah, okay,
have to line up.
okay.
So I think you'll have some teams kicking away from that number 1 guy, so the number 2
2
guy
guy, yeah, yeah, I could see
might have
that.
an
Of
opportunity.
course, people may overreact early with their fab, and that will be fine,
Yes.
right? They'll
Yes.
overspend. I would be curious and chart that as well, folks.
but a lot of the decision making that went into my Scott Fishbowl play at quarterback, especially, Professor,
Mhm.
came from some of the data that you're working on at looking at Vegas prop bets for the year.
Yes. Yeah.
I was really intrigued
Eh,
by the data that you teased out to me, and I know you've got some to
Yeah,
share
yeah,
today, and
yeah.
of
So
course, we're
I'm recording this for the visuals, Dennis, and this is stuff I found on the internet. My only this is professor's gripe. I wish you sports books would have like CMC VS files, so it'd be easier for me to drop this into Excel. I kind of had to hand do some of this. So anyway, what you're seeing here, and I just did it by alphabet here, Dennis. Quarterbacks. These are future seasonal passing yards, future seasonal passing touchdowns, rushing yards, and rushing TDs. If you like betting on rushing quarterbacks, they don't give you a lot of props out there. Some are more interesting than others, but I've got this data. And then here are the players again in alphabetical order with the passing touchdowns. So I converted this to 4 TD fantasy points and 10 yards for a point fantasy points and got something over here fantasy seasonal fantasy points, and then I scaled it 0 to 100 just for my view. I love to take the data and then broke it into tiers, and this is just passing only, not including rushing, and some things that were of interest. And we can now cherry pick what Vegas thinks about the passing landscape this year. This is Vegas's opinion. It's not our opinion, right? And again, my concept preseason is to use our weekly tools. There's 5 of them. We've got that in some other articles and things. Get that's opinion. And this year we're still beta testing. And then I wanted to include Vegas's opinion. And now we've got the ADP's opinion. And I play at FFPC. They don't pay me any money. They should, because I talk about them. Yeah, where's my touch? And then their pro projections. I've got those projections. And then we've got our metric projections, and now we got Vegas. And folks, what I'm building is multiple data streams allow us to broaden the table of data. Ooh, the dog hit that. Hey, and that was my microphone, Dennis. He's going nuts. And so that allows us to have a broad landscape to think about forecasting, right? We're, it's funny, Dennis, it all leads to Dennis's forecasting skills. So I tell people what you're seeing here is Vegas. When you look at our metrics, that is just the beginning. This is not the end. Folks, we are not stuck on anything that we say. This is a beginning for us to think deeper. And that's what you need. That's that final piece that requires that experience, folks, is over years. Remember, Dennis professionally is a meteorologist, me as a university biologist. Okay, years, 10s, 20s, 30 years of data analysis. Plus, we invested at the horse racing track. We've been using data analysis for a long time, and now been playing fantasy for multiple years. So every which way we've been doing forecasting, and I'm trying to present different ways to looking at the data. I hate one way. That's no offense to any site, but your site would just be one way for me to look at things. I would never be finished. I would only use that and say, why do you think this? Why do you think that? So this is what Vegas says, Dennis. And the question I wanted to talk to you about was Josh Allen on his passing. And you can see he's what? He's about how many? 10th, 11th best passer according to Vegas. And then anything else you want to talk about. But I want to start with Josh Allen. He's what? Number 1 or 2 currently ADP. I know they're talking rushing. I believe he got 15 rushing touchdowns. Was that what I remember? I'm trying to,
That is correct.
yeah,
That is
15.
correct.
Okay. I've got some other secret data there. You just saw a little bit of it, but this is, we'll tease this. I'm going to make an article out of this, folks, but it may be after the X. I don't know if I get a chance this year, but anyway, so what do you think about Vegas is now hanging their hat is passing. They're thinking he's going to do a lot of rushing, 8.5 touchdowns instead of 15. So they're cutting it in half. They think Jalen Hurts is going to get 9.5. So what you think about that? Is that too conservative? Vegas being a little conservative on some of those props?
Can be very tough forecasting rushing touchdowns at quarterback because here's Josh Allen, his career touchdowns rushing by season. Last year 15, year before 7, year before 6, 2020 8, 9 and 8
So
as a rookie.
that's where that metric comes from then, Dennis.
So they're at 8.5. They're
They're
taking
they're
basically the
given
mean.
like a median or an
Yep,
average kind of thing
yep.
there. Yeah. Okay,
And
that's where
and
it comes
his rushing average has been as low as 421 and as high as 776.
from. Okay.
So great variances when it comes to rushing touchdowns. Now, the interesting thing, I did a small study about this years ago to look at quarterbacks like him. And if you look at their total quarter or total touchdowns scored,
Yeah.
so we just saw the huge variance in rushing touchdowns, right?
Right.
His total touchdowns scored last year 44, the year before 42, the year before 42, the year before 45, the year before 29, and then as a rookie, just 18. So in his last 4 seasons, Professor,
Mhm.
it's been right around 42, 43 for a median. So while his rushing touchdowns have varied greatly,
Mhm.
a lot of those rushing touchdowns last year came at the expense of
Passing
passing
touch.
touchdowns in the red zone in the past. So it's interesting when you look at this data of how many total touchdowns a quarterback has had and you compare it to what their what their normal amount is. It does give sort of an interesting look at that data. And even a guy like Mahomes, he hasn't changed much with rushing touchdowns.
Vegas
His
loves Mahomes for passing, Dennis. Number
Oh yeah,
one. Number
and
one for
and
passing.
his passing touchdowns have been pretty even distribution, with the exception of 2019 when he missed a couple of games. He only played 14 games that year and only had 28 touchdowns or 26 touchdowns. And last year, he was down to 27 passing TDs. So this year, obviously, Vegas is saying, hey, we expect him to bounce back. And this year, Xavier Worthy drafted, Hollywood Brown added. I actually think Jared Wiley, who they drafted as a tight end, is going to be a great red zone target from year one. So all of a sudden, you got more weapons, assuming that Rashi Rice doesn't get suspended all year. You've got more targets, more
And
players
Vegas
to target.
really loves his Passing touchdowns, 31.5 is the highest.
And that's really quite low when you look at his historic figures in the past. So i- if I were to pick a quarterback in the NFL this year, Professor, to throw 35 or more touchdowns,
Mhm.
Mahomes is up towards the top of that list.
Wh
He's got better
Vegas
weapons.
Vegas doesn't even have 31's the highest. So
Yes,
anybody that gets that and you bet on them, you win if you took
yes,
the over.
yes. And I think he's got a good chance of being out over that 31 total, as I do Dak Prescott. And that's why in Scott Fishbowl, I was glad to grab both of those quarterbacks because
Well,
6 points.
Vegas would say you picked the top 2 in passing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will take that. And if a running quarterback beats me, that's fine. I wanted two guys that were going to be reliable producers.
Mhm.
So I've got a good base every week and I don't have to worry about the volatility of rushing yards. Because from one week to the next, Professor, look at Lamar Jackson. Look at his game logs. He'll have some 100-yard games, he'll have some 30-yard games. It's
He's way down
hard.
in passing. They're
Oh, yeah.
underwhelmed in passing this year. Vegas is, like I said, underwhelmed. Uh, he's 32, one of the lowest actually. I mean, we're talking, I mean, barely above Bo Nix, same as Anthony Richardson. They just think Anthony Richardson rushes and Lamar Jackson rushes somewhat. So Vegas is saying not passing, he'll have to up his game or keep his game up in rushing. Both of those quarterbacks, and they're going to be the rushing quarterbacks that some of your kind of subtle strategy about picking two or three quarterbacks, you like a deep passer kind of guy like a Prescott with an Anthony Richardson or a rusher type, right? Or if you go Jalen Hurts early, then you might take, a passer type like a Stroud or even like a Goff or somebody later, Burrow later, kind of doubling up with the two dynamics of the rusher versus the passer.
I love that strategy in redraft. I have been taking more in the recent years, Professor. Years ago, I took one quarterback and I took a quarterback fairly late. That was the strategy that was working 30 years ago. Nowadays, I'm drafting two quarterbacks, and quite often, Professor, I'm drafting them in back to back rounds.
Mhm.
I'm drafting them in the fifth and sixth or the fourth and fifth.
A lot of people we saw, and it's ninth and 10th, people are starting to, the late round folks, it's becoming late round to the ninth or 10th. You're getting
Yeah,
Tua, Lawrence, some of those, Cousins, maybe some of those folks in that round. So, in our strategy to follow up on what you're doing, if you're going to pick back to back, you need to decide kind of if you're picking in 5 or 6, what are you doing before and after? In other words, you don't need to do that then like, okay, now what do I turn to? In other words, you need your strategy to understand, okay, I'm jumping here and then I'm moving over here. In other words, you don't need to be sitting there, especially in the time draft. Okay, what am I doing now? I guarantee you in Scott Fishbowl, Dennis wasn't looking around the rest of the old drunkards out there saying, well, what am I going to do here? I guess watch these guys for entertainment and just take anybody. You had a plan. It's adaptive, it's focused, it's moving. There is no surprises. And folks, y'all need to be doing things like that. And I've been doing best ball to hone up my strategy. I've done early, mid, and late. Early means second, third round quarterback, 10 best ball. Mid, sixth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and then 10 of those, and then I'm still on 10 late round, 10, 11, 12, hitting those quarterbacks. So I'm pretty much gone through the three scenarios, and I know getting there and then leaving that stop. It's kind of like a train station. What am I doing now? And I've practiced all that strategy getting ready for redrafts.
Yeah, and I did the same thing with some mocks against myself. So I was only mocking against ADP in
Mhm.
Scott Fishbowl. I
Right,
did a couple other mocks against other people that were
right.
in the tournament, but some of them I just did as an exercise to see what's most likely to be available at the sixth draft position. I was pretty convinced, Professor,
Yeah.
that it was CD Lamb was going to be my first pick. And I loved the idea of stacking him with
Yeah,
Dak
with Dak.
Prescott in the second round. And one of the reasons I love that is during the Scott Fish Bowl,
Yeah,
CD Lamb has four good games, four easy or very easy defensive matchups, only one tough or really tough.
yeah,
So in seven for the whole season versus seven good matchups versus one really bad matchup.
right.
And, so I looked at that and I said, wow. Likely for Dak Prescott, he's 6-5, six to the good, five to the bad overall the whole season, three to good, one to the bad during the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. When you are dropping from 2,000 to 1,500 to 1,000 to 500 each round, where you're losing you're losing a good portion of the players
Right.
in a tournament setting. You want to have some consistent play at quarterback. This is a super flex. Now we're talking about drafting strategy for one quarterback drafts mainly, with that idea of going back to back later rounds with quarterbacks. But I just didn't want guys that had great volatility against tough defenses or had bye weeks during the Scott Fish Bowl playoffs. So
Yeah,
every rule in your league, every move before yours in the draft, all go into your decision making. So I'd be three picks away in Scott Fishbowl during the live draft. I'd have five players picked out, Professor.
yep, yep.
I know one of them's going to be there. If I've got five players and I'm only three away, I know one of them's going to be there. And if I get a guy that then lasts an additional round, he becomes my automatic pick.
Right.
I had a situation where Roma Dunze dropped 2 rounds later than his average ADP.
Nice.
He became the obvious pick. And yes, I looked at all the other opportunities that would be there at that pick. And I said, no, I kind of like this guy. So those are the kinds of strategy decisions you always need to be thinking. You can't wait until your pick in the draft is up to then suddenly decide, oh, this is the guy I need to look at. You need to always be thinking ahead. And Professor, this year we're looking at the data even in an additional way. Two successful players in one quarterback redraft, one quarterback best ball. We've consistently cashed over the years. But Professor, we're always trying to push and understand ADP better
Mhm.
and our metrics better because
Right.
there's still room for improvement even when you're a successful player.
Yeah, and I've got on the screen, I did by the way, there's lots more Vegas stuff. I'll have the running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and we'll have some more of that. Hopefully an article, but maybe not. I've got so much that I'm not showing because Dennis and I are let's call it the science of fantasy football betting. That's, and I don't know where or when that will show up. I'm just telling you, we are building the stage, folks, collaborators, people that may be listening. I don't know when we open the curtain, but I spent about 2 solid months tracking years of prop betting and things, and we're going to be investigating that world. And so that you saw a little bit of that, trying to understand what Vegas is thinking. Okay, fantasy football wise, getting back here, that's what we call in the professional folks called a tease. So that was a tease for Vegas stuff. But for what we're doing, Dennis, this article, and it's not really an article because I like to do videos. So my video lesson for this, where I kind of cherry pick through, but I think all my visuals here are pretty straightforward. And if you're watching the article, and I've got the hard copy, this is FFPC best ball ADP based. So that's what we're drawing against here. The ranking, the ADP, the draft round predicted, the player, the position, the team, the buy. And based on the ADP, what is the positional rank? So CMC is the first RB, Bijan Robinson the second, the first wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill's the second, uh, Laporta's the top tight end, Kelsey's second, etc. And then I have something called, and I just made these, we got to have tricky abbreviations to fool folks. My average Bush Middleton metric here, I call it. And what I did, Dennis, was I took all 5 of our weekly tools that we developed that are related but still have different ways of looking at that world in a weekly level. As Dennis said, we got to have weekly tools. Well, we got 5 of them, folks, and we are using the next few years beta testing. And is it a combination of all 5 or only 1 or 2 worth our time? There's a statistical test called principal component analysis, where you can actually look at 5 different metrics and figure out which metrics are related. In other words, they're basically saying the same thing. Which metrics are different? How should you combine them? This year, I just did an average, Dennis. I took all 5 of our metrics, I scaled them on the same scale, so that's not a problem. 0 to 100, and just got an average. And so that ABMM is just the average, and CMC's 100 on that scale. Tyreek Hill actually came out number 2 with CeeDee Lamb number 3, and Travis Kelsey number 4. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was the 4th best in that metric. And again, folks, this is not the end. This is the beginning. I narrate this. We're not stopping. This is not the end. This is just for you to start thinking. We are giving you the slate in our order based on these metrics. So this is not gut feeling. This is not 12 beers in, what do I think? These are metrics based on numbers, algorithms, things, and we now apply. So that's the math side, the science side. Then you can apply the art, right? There's the mix of the man machine decision making. Dennis is fond of that in weather forecasting. We're trying to do the same thing, except our brains are the machine until the Terminators get here. That's as good as we can do it until the AI is doing fantasy. And then you just pay for the best AI to crush your league, right? That won't be fun anymore. I like to do this myself. It won't be fun to let AI do it. But anyway, we have, based on our metric, a positional rank. And then Dennis, I have something called POS difference, positional difference. This is the difference of our ranking versus the public. And I color coded so quickly, folks, you can just, man, there's too much numbers. Well, if it's pink, that means our metrics are lower than the public. If it's green, our metrics are higher. We have nothing in the first round that we are higher on, but we have 5 that we have concerns about that I would say you need to do your homework. Not saying they're bust or whatever, just saying there's some tweaks in their armor that need to be thought about before you use your first round betting capital. That's it. This is, and you're saying, well, what about these other ones? That means they're about on price. So sometimes the best strategy is let your opponents grab uncertain players and you try to stay at, be safe, right? And the fifth best, by the way, is the sun god, Dennis. And a lot of times I've actually been drafting him over Tyreek Hill. I've really been bouncing back and forth on those two guys. But anyway, our metric would say Hill over Brown, but that was last year. What's it going to be this year? So I did a little tweak on my forecasting, and I've been taking Brown a little bit more than Hill. I've taken Hill in my best ball, but I've taken Brown probably 2 to 1. So 30% Hill versus Brown if I could get Lamb or CMC. That's just kind of been where I've been, and I've taken Bijan if I wanted to do an RB uh, uh, if he was available. So anyway, I'll shut up. So Derrick Henry and Devontae Adams in the second round, our metrics would suggest they are seen higher than the public. So that's the first 2 rounds. I've got all rounds to round 20, folks. So you can go through this. You can chart our metrics, whatever you want to do. It's all here. And one last thing, PPR scaled, that is the FFPC uh, end of the year seasonal points scaled, just so you see what I guess whoever that is, professionals, what they think as well. And Bush figure, uh, weekly values, MVP and best. That's all the top 2 are mine, Bush and Dennis's are weekly value MVP best. His articles on what those are out. My articles, Bush and are out. You can look at the background of all those 5 metrics. We're averaging those this year. Boy, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, and I love the way you're looking at this, Professor, because I look at a fantasy football draft a lot different, perhaps, than some do, because I think a lot of folks, hey, I want to make a statement early in the draft. I want to grab this guy because I think he's got the potential to be number one. In the first few rounds of a fantasy draft, I'm protecting my draft capital. I don't want to make huge mistake early. And I do like that idea of Amon-Ra St. Brown at par, if not slightly above Tyreek Hill this season. And the reason is all age and experience.
And I do like
So,
the golf and the home field and the
yes,
domes and some other.
yes.
There's some other things that seem to favor Detroit a little more this year. That's another part. And you're the one who brought that up to me, so I've been cooking that into my choices there between Hill and Brown.
Yeah, and the whole thing has been golf, huge home away splits. People have noticed that over the years, but I dove another level deeper and said, yes, there's a huge home away split, but when he's got a favorable weather condition on the road, that split is a lot less. And when the wind conditions are bad, and I'm saying over 10 miles an hour, 7 seemed to be the limit for his best games the last couple years. But definitely as the wind got stronger, his fantasy success dropped off. Not all quarterbacks are like that. Mahomes passing in 25-mile-an-hour winds doesn't seem to be all that significantly worse as long as there's not precipitation. So each quarterback has a different way of throwing the ball, a different skill set, and the offenses do as well that may or may not skew that situation. Mahomes is throwing the ball short last year, the last 2 years, lots more short passes. So of course he's not going to be as affected as somebody who's airing out the longer passes more often. But this year, Goff has 5 games in controlled environments, and he's got another game that is at night where the winds are likely to be less. I kind of like that. You've got a huge percentage of your games that are going to be either climate controlled or one more that probably will not be weather sensitive. So, and his games where he is most likely to be exposed to the elements are earlier in the season. Weather variables add up. So if it's a windy day, but if it's a warm day with no precipitation, that's going to be different than if it's a windy, cold day with heavy snow, like the or rain. The more different weather variables that you have involved, the worse the problem. And yes, early in the season, you could deal with the thunderstorm game, but they're going to stop the game versus in the fall where it could be a heavy rain without thunder and they keep playing. So there's a lot of very intricate detail that goes into some of the effects, and a lot of it's not as well known as you might think because it is very player by player variable. But when it comes to golf, I've got a lot of him on dynasty rosters. I have been getting him cheap in redraft for years. So I've been watching the matchups very closely. We have him on one of our dynasty teams that we co-manage.
Yep.
So we've been watching him closer than we have other players. And as a result, I really like the Sun God this year. I've I've got a lot of him. I'm taking him early in drafts. I'm not afraid of splurging on him, but it's because the data says he's safe. He's a safe first round pick. I don't like uncertainty in the first round. Jamar Chase is a classic example, a terrific player, an amazing fantasy football player when he has his big games, but he has some small games. There are some uncertainties that say, I don't want him as one of my top 3 wide receivers. So that's the way I approach fantasy football that's a little bit different because, Professor, if I pass on an Amon-Ra St. Brown in that first round and I take a Justin Jefferson or I go running back and I take a Brees Hall, whatever, there's a lot of great options in the first round. The farther you go down in the draft, the fewer great options there are. So doesn't it make sense to protect yourself early on? And I did that as a big part of my Scott Fishbowl strategy in that I did not go for the more inconsistent but spike game guys. Because when it came to the fantasy football playoffs, which start in week 12 in Scott Fishbowl, I did not want to be vulnerable to a guy with a bad game. If he was a spike game guy, I didn't want him to have the worst of his games during the season and get me eliminated. So I went a little more on consistency. And early on, I wanted a guy that was proven by all 5 of our weekly metrics. If I had a guy that was 5 for 5, I'm drafting him with confidence in those first couple of rounds.
His metrics are better than, say, Jamar Chase. If you look, uh, ours give him 81, 92, 85, basically 94, 83. Chase is 44, 38, 87, 78, 63 on your best. So there, like I said, it doesn't mean he's going to be that bad or what, but it's a warning. There's something a little bit there that Brown doesn't have. That the uncertainty, the metrics are pointing to a higher level, uncertainty. I don't think the ceiling's higher. I think the floor is lower with Chase versus Brown. So that's what Dennis is. When I think of that, I see a boxing whisker and I see a long whisker, and that really, when that whisker touches the water, right? That if you're catfishing, you got to worry about those whiskers and whatnot on the catfish. And I like my catfish a little bit tender. If you're gonna fry them up good, and then smaller whiskers, then and Jamar Chase a little bit longer, a little bit that won't fry up as good down here in the fish fry. So I could. It always comes back to hillbilly eating down here, Dennis, or swamp eating down in Louisiana. So we can always do the crawfish scale, and that's what I figure. I'm working on that. I hadn't told you that, but I'm working on that cayenne pepper, forecasting there for this year. We're gonna it'll all be come out in the gumbo, Dennis. Just like my Saints this year. It's all gonna come out in the gumbo this year.
There you go. And see, that's the big key, folks. If you pass on one guy early, for instance, if I'm drafting a wide receiver later, second half of the first round, and I pass on AJ Brown, am I really going to do all that bad with Puka Nakua? Like,
No, but I
oh,
would I've had that choice, and I've taken Brown a little bit more than Puka this year.
and
About
so have I.
about
Yeah.
2 to 1.
Yeah, and I made that similar decision, but let's say AJ Brown gets taken the pick
Then
ahead
then
of me.
then if I'm wanting a wide receiver, because I'm looking a little worried about Gibbs, a little worried about Garrett Wilson,
Yep.
thinking, Barkley looks safe, maybe a tight end coming up. If I'm that low, then I'm on the river, on the turn. I'll be able to flip me a tight end or a strong wide, maybe Harrison. I kind of, get my chops ready to smack on one of those good second round picks. And I'm thinking, okay, Nakua I can take, and maybe a Henry or somebody, or maybe a Harrison, that kind of thing. It depends on what I'm doing, Dennis, and what people are doing. I mean, if they've
And
left, Justin Jefferson up there, say Brown's gone. Well, okay, it depends on what's on the board, but yeah, Puka would be a pretty good safe target versus, say, Gibbs or Wilson or even Taylor.
that's exactly what happened to me in the first round of the Scott Fish Bowl. Is I was perfectly happy leaving the first round with CD Lamb.
Yeah,
And I knew that if CD Lamb was taken before the sixth pick, so I didn't have access to him, it meant somebody else good was falling.
yeah,
But the key was, this is super flex league. I am perfectly fine not opening with a quarterback because I think there's going to be plenty of quarterback talent available that I can double up. And what did I end up doing? I ended up doubling up the first two rounds, which was not a single mock, not a single mock that I did leading up to Scott Fishbowl did I make the decision to go quarterback, even though it was a super flex. And what did I end up doing
quarterback.
on the live draft, Scott Fishbowl? quarterback, quarterback. It just shows you that you prepare, but you got to be adaptive to what's going on. And seeing that opportunity, as soon as I saw the player who took CD Lamb with the seventh pick, as soon as I saw him pass on Dak Prescott, first of all, I was shocked. Now, he did take Travis Kelsey. So the question was, and actually, when he took Travis Kelsey, he looked over at me, he said, "There goes your stack." But there went his stack as well. I don't like to play defensive in fantasy football. I like to build a stack if it's there, but I'm not going to go out of my way to build my own stack or ruin somebody else's stack. But as soon as I saw Dak Prescott on the board, I'm like, first of all, he's not coming back around.
No, no, he's gone.
So I'll take Dak and take that chance. But if Kelsey had been on the board, Professor,
You probably would
my
have had
whole
him.
draft goes in a different way. But one guy that I did not expect to be there in the third round in Scott Fishbowl, Trey McBride. So now I had two quarterbacks and I had an opportunity to have one of the top four tight ends
Yeah,
in
McBride's
fantasy
going.
football.
Yeah, going. Yeah, I
So
just flipped
anyway,
to the third round here,
yeah,
and like I said, people can follow this because I know we don't have time to go through all 20 rounds, but uh, the pink is an issue, and I will say, if you'll look in my article, and Dennis, I think you might like this. I'm gonna go all the way down to secret place, secret data, a professor's way of looking. This simple chart, Dennis, tracks each block of rounds by the green and the pinks that our metric versus the public.
ooh,
So if you look in quarterbacks, you see we have two greens, 7th, 8th, 2, 9th, 10th. And if you wait 15, 16, 17, 8, there's one, but that's it. Okay. But look at the low, 5 and 6. There's some low there. 13, 14. There's some low. Look at the high RBs, low RBs. So this charts us to potential, and I hate to use the word sleeper because that's not the definition that I would apply this. But look at tight ends, 9 and 10. Nothing happening until 9 or 10, and there's three. So if you went to the 9th and 10th round on this metric here for the tight ends, we're talking, let's see, Hawkinson is of interest to us, and Cole Kmet. And I don't know where the third one is. I may have misdone that one, but anyway, that was of interest. Certainly a second tight end there. By the way, there's no high, but there wasn't a lot of low either early on. And then wide receivers, high versus low. So this is a snapshot, Dennis, of our positional differences versus the public. And I've never seen anybody do anything like this view in here. And folks, that this is the thinking outside the box that I hope we're delivering to you. The process, it's, and you're thinking, and if the quick question, hold it, I'm paying X amount of money every year. I don't get anything like this. Folks, we're giving it to you right now. Jump on board for free. Okay. Who knows down the road if, somebody wakes up and grabs us, then it may not be free. But this is the kind of landscape viewing that I think is essential when you're looking at draft patterns and understanding what's going on. And
and here's
yeah,
and here's a key to where that applies in fantasy football, Professor, because if you're going against consensus and you are right,
yep.
you're going to win a lot of money.
Well, that's,
And that's
yep,
the
that's what I'm
whole,
trying to do. Yeah.
yeah, that's the whole strategy. Because if you go along with consensus from start to finish, you can still be a winner, but you need a little bit more luck when it comes to matchups. You need a little more luck when it comes to injuries. But if you're going against consensus and you're right often enough, you can be that little zig when everybody else is zagging. And what this chart is showing is where you're able to get some unexpected value in your fantasy football draft. Now, this is all based on past performances.
Yes.
You need to be smart enough to
It's a
add
start.
to the past performances.
You're forecasting. Yes. And your
Correct.
diary, Dennis. So, folks, if you're first time with us, this kind of stuff, save it in your diary. And because we're going to be charting this as well. So, is this of value to you? And I hope it is because I'm using it. And Dennis, it just hits me when I look at this fresh eyed. 17 and 18 looks like there's some RBs of interest. And this is not charting the rookies because I have no past performances on them. This is
Right.
just so, but versus look at the wide receivers rounds 19 to 25. So it looks to me like the RBWR, this is, unless there's rookies and things you want to do, that looks like a pattern you want to begin your strategy with and then deviate as you need. But that kind, see, that's how I take this kind of information, you know, and let this direct me to some, especially deeper in the draft, people just kind of start flipping coins and, open that second six pack, folks. You celebrate in January when you're counting your league's money. That's when you pop the cork on the champagne, not swilling it up at the draft. I'm gonna kick your ass. Okay, second bottle. Here, buddy. I'll buy you an extra couple drinks.
And this goes so well with my better than zero strategy and one quarterback redraft because the whole idea is to make sure you get the best value, the less risk early,
Yeah.
and it usually leads you to getting your four wide receivers that you want rostered a little bit earlier than you might have your first four running backs. But then look at all this gold mine
Yep.
later in the draft when we are concentrating on running backs by
There.
having twice as many of them.
Yep.
We're getting those running backs in these rounds where it's also telling us that our metrics are better than consensus. And
There's
if your metrics
something
are better,
there. There it's
yes.
it's warning us, hey, don't miss this. And that's where we look deeper. In your forecasting, you got to start somewhere, right? Weather patterns are that historical patterns, and then you apply models based on that. But you got to do that machine man thinking, Dennis, that forecasting. Love Dennis's ideas when he does his own metrics. He still comes back every year and forecasts for you, folks. Okay, he's going to say, with this improvement, we're here. Okay, it's never static, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not well, it got 300 points last year, so he'll get it again. It's just a starting point. And then what are you forecasting this year? And that's connecting the dots and putting it all together for you folks.
Well, a classic example of a player this year, Professor, that last year I was higher on him than just about everybody else. And this year, I'm actually below consensus in how I think about him. And I'm not saying he's a horrible player, but DJ Moore was in a situation last year with the Bears where he had no obvious competition
You
or
know what round
targets.
he's going in? We can look at
And
his
and
metrics.
this year,
I don't know.
he's going in the 5th round.
Okay, let's go to the fifth. There we go. More. fifth, sixth.
Should
Was
be
it?
should be in that neighborhood anyway.
Maybe he's second
Oh, I'm
round?
sorry. I'm looking at my Scott Fish Bowl
Fourth,
draft. He was going in the
fourth,
5th round.
fourth here.
So he's going in the 4th round, Professor.
He's not a bargain. He's not, he's just, eh. There's a lot of other
Correct.
ones. Yeah, he's an eh.
He's going higher. He's going earlier in drafts this year, Professor,
Mhm.
than he was last year at this time. Yet the Bears added Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze and DeAndre Swift to the mix. So when I look at him, and again, I'm not saying he's a bad choice where he's going in the draft.
So you're
I'm just saying
forecasting worse than we had him last year.
you have to forecast
Yeah.
that he's got more competition for targets
Okay.
this year. It only makes sense. They added
He would be our
so
17th RB based on last year as a
wide
starting point.
receiver. Yes.
As wide receiver. Yeah, as a
Correct.
start. Yeah.
Correct. So I'm looking at this and saying his metrics,
Mhm.
you're paying the price for no competition for targets like he had last year.
You might even
And
say this is his ceiling this
it's
year because
definitely
you're forecasting.
unless something happens to Keenan Allen and
Yeah.
Rome Odunze are busts and Caleb Williams is the greatest quarterback that the Bears have ever had. All of those are possibilities, but
Yeah, but it
all
starts getting
three
lean
have
when you
to.
start adding A, B, C, it's this domino, this, then we got that. That gets me a little worried on,
Yes,
ceiling kind of things.
what and if he was available in the 6th or 7th or 8th rounds,
Yeah, but that's different.
everything is different. But he is going as if the Bears improved at quarterback and didn't
See,
change the target
Dennis,
competition.
I have been taking Pittman in that round if
Yes,
he's available.
yes. Love Pittman in that spot. Love Pittman in
We
that spot.
think 12, public 22. That's why he's a green. And we
And
like
Pitt
Devona Smith, 15 versus
oh,
21.
yeah.
So that's why I
Pittman
haven't
last
have
year
a lot of more myself is because those other bargains that I think are out there. So I'm jumping over more to grab Smith or Pittman.
yeah, and I love Pittman, and I also look at Pittman and I say, I see people say, "Oh, I don't like Pittman because he doesn't score touchdowns." All right. What if you get the same receptions or more from him this year with a better quarterback if Richardson can stay healthy and a better offense if Richardson is healthy and if Jonathan Taylor is healthy all season? That offense should be better if those two players are healthy, the offense will be better. No doubt. That's not even a discussion. So now you've got a player who had really good receptions, real good yardage. The only thing he was lacking was touchdown.
Our
What if his
metrics
touchdowns
charted, Dennis. Our metrics charted pretty good numbers without those touchdowns. So this may be
correct,
more the floor than the ceiling.
correct. And that's the way I look at the changes from one season to the next. Here's a wide receiver that was a solid contributor in fantasy football last year, despite playing with a mishmash at quarterback, a backup quarterback. Now you give him, and again, assuming Anthony Richardson is good at his job, which he appeared to be in part time duty last year. So now he stays healthy. Jonathan Taylor stays healthy. That offense alone is better. There's no real additional target competition for Pittman. They brought in Adonai Mitchell, which if anything, makes it harder for teams to concentrate on just Pittman because now you got Downs and a Donnie Mitchell that can take a little of the heat off of teams being it. They won't be able to double team Pittman because the other guys will beat him. Plus, you got Jelani Woods back and healthy. So, yes, there's a little more competition for targets, but there's less likely to see double teams on Pittman.
So the defensive pressure would be a little weaker this year. You're forecasting.
You would
Yeah.
think so on a weekly basis,
Yep.
just for that one player. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at. But even if I don't increase Pittman's value
Yeah.
this season, he's still a value at that draft pick. So now, if any of the good things happen,
Yep.
you've got just upside to go. So those are the kinds of ways that I like to look at each one of these situations. Is it a plus or minus? Garrett Wilson and Drake London are two more classic examples. These are terrific football players. These are players that have been able to get a high percentage of target share with poor quarterback play.
Yep.
But where they're being drafted, Professor,
Yeah.
is a lot closer to everything going right for them this
We're
season.
we're 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 really worried about Drake London. The metrics
Yes,
last year were very lean. And Garrett
but
Wilson's another
yeah,
one. Very
correct.
they're being
And both
priced
are
at their
seniors.
ceiling, and we would
Yes,
be worried about that. We would like closer to their floor to pick them up.
that's correct. And both of these players are terrific talents that if
No
Atlanta is
doubt.
better, if Kirk Cousins stays healthy,
If Aaron
if
Rodgers helps Wilson,
yes.
yes,
So
lots of ifs.
all of these factors go into play. The best we can consider from either player is maybe the fifth best wide receiver in the league. That's the app. That's their. That should be their ceiling because the Jets are not going to pass enough to make him a threat to CD Lamb, the Sun God, or Tyreek Hill. I don't see that happening.
Or A.J. Brown.
Or AJ Brown. So fifth best. That's my
That's
upside.
aggressive.
That would
The
be
the
that would be
pros
the
say 8 and 10.
yeah. So, but that's as good as he can get. Either guy. Fifth best is the absolute best. Where are they
That's a
being
lean
drafted?
whisker there, Dennis.
Yes, because you need everything to go right for them to be 3 to 5 positions above where their ADP is saying there should be.
Yep.
Versus what if Rodgers gets hurt? What if Atlanta's new coach just looks good on paper and gets his
Right.
butt kicked? Or what if they just find out that Bijan Robinson is such a great player
Yep.
that he can dominate teams and there's no need to pass 45 times a game
Yep.
with their defense and great running game? So all of a sudden you got a Drake London who now his most likely finish is maybe 10th to 15th. And you're drafting him above or right at the top end of that. That's the way I don't like to take chances on players. I don't like to have a career year for them to be a fantasy football value versus their ADP.
See, I'd
And
be
the
taking
interesting thing,
Harrison over both those guys.
I'll
That's
roll the
just
dice with it.
if
Yes.
I'm gambling that if Kelsey's gone and I've got to say CMC whatever, Harrison would be more attractive as a gamble. If I'm going to gamble, he just the pedigree, everything seems to scream Harrison gets all the targets and that kind of thing. That's the comparison we have to do as well.
So head on over to the Science of Fantasy Football. There are so many charts to check out, folks. I'll have some new articles coming soon. And I'm going to tell you, if you understand the way to attack ADP, the way the professor has laid this data out, you will be much more successful because you'll be taking far fewer reaches. And then, of course, head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks.